We are really excited to be delivering this webinar today because it's the full FCL team. I'm Lindsay Stride. I'm the Training and Knowledge Exchange Coordinator for FCL, and I've been a trustee for nearly 20 years, which is incredible. We also have Jo Swires with us today. Jo's worked on several projects over the years for FCL and has delivered lots of collaborative practice training and workshops. We very sadly don't have Mark Holmes with us today. He's been called away because of an urgent family matter, but Jo's very kindly stepped in and will be delivering his slides. We have Owen Morgan with us. He's our SFI team lead and is also working on the short courses with the University of Cumbria. Behind the scenes, we have Susie, who's our administrator. So if you were to call FCL, it's Susie you're more than likely to be speaking to on the phone. And we also have Tamsin Thomas helping behind the scenes, and she is our facilitator in Dartmoor. So it's really lovely to be here together to deliver this webinar. Jo, if we could move on to the agenda.
This is where hi everyone. I am just trying to, I'm pressing the arrow and nothing is happening. So let's have a little look. Why is that?
We love a bit of a tech.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
But I'll just talk.
Here we go. There, let's try that.
We are going to be, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about why Commons are different and why they're a special case and require some fairly careful facilitation. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about governance and why that's so important and underpins lots of what happens on Commons. Then we're going to hear about the North York Moors Sheep Tracking Project and the SFI app that we've been developing. Those are two small case studies that really help us to think about some of the issues. And then Jo's going to talk about facilitating workshops and meetings on common land. And we'll finish with a Q&A. And if you would like to ask a question, please add it to the Q&A rather than the chat. And if you're looking at the Q&A, you can upvote questions that you are really keen to hear the answer to. We will try and answer your questions live, but if we don't get that chance today, we will prepare a Q&A document that we'll send out with the recording after the webinar, so you'll be able to see the answers to those questions. They're useful to us as well, so that we understand what you're interested in and the issues that you have with facilitation and working on Commons. So we also have a couple of interactive polls during the webinar, just to help you to think and give us a bit of a breather. Well done to everyone who's introduced themselves in the chat. It's always really good for people to see who's with us and yeah, to see who's joining us and from which parts of the country. It's always interesting. So I'm going to just talk a little bit about why Commons are special. So in England, just 3% of land is common land. It's a really, really small part of land, and some might say insignificant, but Commons deliver a pretty hefty punch when it comes to designations. So if you look at this slide, you can see that 39% of open access land is common land. 11% of scheduled monuments are on Commons. 82% of Commons are in national parks and protected landscapes, and 21% of all SSSIs are on common land. So when you're working on a common, more often than not, you're working with some of the most precious landscapes in this country. So whilst it's a really small amount of land, it's really important. So if we move on, Jo. So I think it's worth saying that common land across England faces many challenges. They're shared spaces, and they're often spaces that have conflicting demands put upon them. Commons are facing challenges on many, many levels: climate, biodiversity, water, farming. Farming livelihoods are critical, and the health and well-being of everyone in this country. But commons are full of brilliant people who together have the potential to ensure these are thriving places for people and nature. And that's what we at FCL come across time and time again: really, really passionate people. And we hope that our webinar today will help you in your work to get the most out of common land, so that we can really deliver on all of those elements. So we've carried out a really large project called our Upland Commons over the last few years, and some of you may be familiar with the projects and the activities that we've carried out. If you haven't seen it already, the evaluation report is a really, really useful document to help you understand the best way of working on common land. So from our evaluation, we've come up with these really 3 useful steps for facilitating projects on common land. And it's got 3 main elements. One is that it's social. When you're working on commons, you're working with people, and people are at the heart of change. It doesn't matter what you want to deliver, it starts with the people. Next, we have to think about the economics on commons. We need thriving farm businesses. We need a thriving rural economy in order to deliver environmental change. So we want common land to move towards optimum ecological health and delivery of and increased environmental benefits. But you have to start with the social element, and that's why we've created this webinar today. And you'll hear we've set it up as a series of top tips. You can see here a small diagram which shows the role of a commons facilitator, and you'll hear us talking about facilitation and facilitators again and again today. So if we move on, Joe. So if we think about the role of a commons facilitator, what do they do? A dedicated capacity focused on whether it's the uplands or the lowlands, but the issues surrounding common land and commoning. And it's important that that person is non-partisan, that they are a neutral person that's able to listen really well to everyone. It's nice for people to have a single point of contact at the farm gate, to know that person, to have personal, friendly conversations. It's about being personalised. Everyone comes from a different position and has a different view. And it's really critical that that advice that you're giving people is personalised. It needs to be timely as well. It's no good when things are going wrong to just leave things hanging. You have to get in there and get things solved and help people. But everything takes time, and building relationships takes time. So it's really important when you're project planning that you build in time to have those conversations. So if we move on. I think whether you're looking at just a small scale project or a landscape scale project over many years, you have to remember that commons are complex places. So if you look at this slide, you can see these are all the legal relations that have to be considered when you're developing a scheme or developing a project. So we've got all of the national legislation to consider. We've got triple SIs, we've got the right to roam. Oh, can we go back? We've got national parks and protected landscape rules and regulations. We've got the rules surrounding common land, and we've got the rules surrounding scheduled ancient monuments. Then we think about other organisations that have an interest. So the Open Spaces Society, the National Trust, the Wildlife Trusts. We've got national parks, the National Landscape Boards. And then we've got the DEFRA family. We've got the RPA, we've got Natural England. All of these organisations, all of this legislation has an impact on what you can deliver and how you can deliver it. Then we look inside the circle. Inside that green circle will be the people who sign those agreements. So that will be the landowners, and they come in many shapes and sizes. It could be a large water company, it could be an individual, it could be a membership organisation like the National Trust. And then you've got commoners, some are tenants, some are owners, some are non-graziers. So this is a really complex starting point for everyone to go from. So if we move on, Joe. So if you're a regular on our webinars, you will know that we talk about governance a lot. And the reason we talk about governance a lot is because it matters. So here are a few tips for thinking particularly about internal agreements. So do not sign a stewardship agreement or a landscape recovery agreement with DEFRA until you have an internal agreement signed by all of the parties. These are valuable contracts with consequences for non-compliance. And some of these agreements are in excess of £100,000 a year over a 10-year period. And I think the thing you have to think about is, would you buy £1 million house without a lawyer or a surveyor? And the answer is, of course you wouldn't. So when you're entering into this type of agreement with these very large sums of money, everything has to be watertight. In order to do that, you really need an independent facilitator who does not act for either the commoners or the landowners individually to negotiate that internal agreement. We get lots of questions at FCL, particularly asking us for templates for internal agreements. We don't provide an internal agreement template because it isn't lawful to do so. You have to use a lawyer experienced in commons and stewardship agreements to prepare your agreement. A non-lawyer, such as a land agent, a facilitator, or a farm advisor, cannot take a template deed and adapt it for their circumstances because that is unlawful. You need to make sure that all of the relevant parties are incorporated into that agreement. And that's where conversations and facilitation has to happen fairly early on in conversations about what you're planning to deliver, if you're looking at schemes such as CS Higher Tier or landscape recovery. And when thinking about plans going forward, it's really important to allow for cash flow and maintenance of capital works. It's really important to keep a contingency for disputes and for administration. Delivery on commons is not cheap because it requires so much to happen in the background that simply wouldn't be there on a regular scheme, on a regular piece of land. So, and another little tip, always have 2 signatories on the bank account, and they cannot be people who are related. Alternatively, you can use a professional firm's client account. So those are just some fairly detailed top tips for governance. So if we move on, you can dive much deeper into these and all of the other issues on the Common Land Toolkit on our website, where you can see we've got all of these different areas, and they'll walk you through the process and the system depending on what you're planning to do and to deliver. The other thing to remember is that on our website, we have a Q&A section. So questions that are often asked of us, we put them on there so that you can access those. But also, if there's a question that you can't find the answer to on our website, you can send us that question, and we have a team of facilitators, and we have a really experienced team of trustees who have huge knowledge across all areas of common land. So we are able either to answer your question or to signpost you to someone who can. So use that. It's a really valuable resource. We could move on, Joe. So I've just got a couple of slides here to show you what governance structures could look like in different situations. So this is the governance structure that could work for smaller, so non-landscape recovery schemes. And the thing I think you have to be mindful of, the future is a much more complex future than we're used to. So historically, we've had a single scheme on the common land, a single internal agreement, a single management plan. And going forward, there are going to be layers, whether it's private schemes, whether they're government schemes, there are going to be multiple things happening on commons. And as you can see from here, there are going to be several internal agreements on every common. So having really good structures in place matters. If we move on, Joe, you can see when we start to talk about landscape recovery, we're adding in that additional layer into the structures. And then we have a number of internal agreements, a number of external agreements on that piece of land. Alongside these, and again, this is all available on our website, you've got to have all of the things in place, dispute resolution, and things to help you when things go wrong. Because good governance it is about managing things that aren't going so well. So before we move on to this kind of the top tips and the lighter part of the webinar, I just want you to think about those plans and those structures that help ensure really good delivery. So if we move on. So Joe is very kindly going to deliver Mark's slides for us. So I'm going to pass on to Joe.
Thank you. Thanks. I'm just trying to show my face, but because I'm sharing the slides as well. There's a there I am. I think
We can't see you, Joe.
I'm here. There I am. I'm here. Thanks everyone. Thanks for your patience with the me sitting in for Mark. So moving on then from what Lindsay's been saying, and she's kind of been setting up, I think hopefully the message you want you to go away with today is FCL has got a whole load of guidance, resources, tips, experience, good people who you can turn to for any of those things. So whether it's in person or you want to go on our website or you want to join more webinars, if you don't know us yet, and hopefully a lot of you will do, you know, we think we're a really good source of useful information for working on commons. So Lindsay's giving you a bit of that background. We've started off talking about governance, which we know is at the heart of what underpins good working on commons. The next 3 bits of presentation that you're going to get, I'm going to do a couple and Owen will do 1, 2 in the middle, is some of our sort of practical expertise of what we're working on at the moment or we've been working on that we want to share with you, and just some sort of top tips really. So Mark has been working with us on a Farming in Protected Landscapes funded project funded by the North York Moors National Park Authority, a project called Resilient Commoning in the North York Moors, and it kicked off last year, around this time last year, and it was instigated by a group of commoners and graziers in the North York Moors who sort of wanted to come together and start working together a bit more. And it was at that level, you know, looking for opportunities to collaborate and some ideas of things they wanted to try and do together. So FCL has supported them through working with the North York Moors to get this project going. And they've done a few different things, which I'll tell you about. Now it keeps doing this thing. I'm sorry, I don't know why it does this. It won't let me move it forward. I don't know if it's when I'm too long on one slide. Here we go. We'll try again. So this is the new logo of the North York Moors Graziers Group. So one or two things that they've been doing that I think have been really interesting. One of the things that the group asked for early on was to consider looking at trying some sheep tracking devices, which has turned into a really interesting part of the project. And that came about mainly thinking about sheep theft and security, and wondering whether fitting some trackers might help to understand that a bit more, and maybe also put people off nicking sheep on some very remote big areas of land in the North York Moors. So as part of the project, we've fitted trackers on 2 farms, on a I think there's about 60 sheep with them on, and have also realised or found that there's a lot more to learn from just from using the trackers than just security. So we're doing a piece of research at the minute with Essex University who've got involved to understand some really interesting data about where the sheep go, what they eat, their different movements, different times of year when they behave differently on the common, all sorts of really interesting insights. So that group of grazies have been really getting stuck into that and have been interested in understanding that data and learning more about it. So that picture on the right is a recent meeting where we got together to look at the trackers, how they're working, and get a bit of insight into that. They've also got a shared weed wiper, which has been another practical thing. But I think more than anything, one of the really useful things has just been getting together as a group of commoners from across the national park area to compare notes, learn from each other, and especially through those winter months, get together and collaborate and see each other when the winters can be sort of quite long and not much happening. So here's Mark's top 5 tips for collaboration that he's kind of built on from some of his other experience, but also his work in the North York Moors. So the first, I'll sort of whiz through them. That identifying opportunities to bring people together. Well, the great thing about the North York Moors is the people in the North York Moors, the commoners, knew that they wanted to work together a bit more. They wanted to learn from each other. And one of the sheep tracking was one thing that they were interested in trying out together. So the exact topic, I suppose, in this one is been worked on all the time and been developed by that group. But the overall aim is for them to collaborate. They want to collaborate more closely and work on stuff jointly. So finding the reason, I suppose, there were a couple of reasons why the Grazies were interested in getting together. And that's just kind of work. It's ongoing. It's work that's progressing as they go along. This is a really interesting one, and I would have added this. If you're going to be working with a group of commoners, or you are a commoner, and you want to start a project, or you want to work more closely with other people on your common, this might sound a bit odd or a bit why would you say this? But actually, well, I'm a big believer in this. Good food brings people together. So if you're going to take the time to organise a meeting or a workshop, I would always involve some food and drink in it, even if it's just a cup of tea and some nice homemade cake one afternoon. But I know on that Graziers group, they have their evening meetings and they start with a meal together, which sets a great atmosphere, gets people chatting, gets people relaxed, and gets a meeting or a workshop off to a good start. And if you can use local sources for your food, brilliant. A local caterer, or just I think they've used some of the local meat, local lamb in the North York Moors, which is great. I would say that is really worthy of investment. I would agree with Mark on that one. So this is Mark's 3rd tip, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in my bit a bit further on. And it goes back to what Lindsay was saying, taking time to fully understand the position of all parties and where they're starting from. So that can often mean talking to people individually or in separate groups before you even start thinking about getting people together in a room or collaborating together. It's taking that time to understand the dynamics of the group and the people who are working together, and having those conversations with people beforehand if you need to. And the other thing to always think about is the language and terminology that you're using, especially when it comes to some of the legal stuff and some of the governance stuff we talked about earlier. That can be quite off-putting and quite dry. So thinking about that carefully and how you express it is important. So this is Mark's 4th tip. sorry, I'm going too ahead of myself. All around balance. So I can't see his words because I'm moving I'll move myself over there. Yeah. So balancing collaboration can be difficult to create and maintain. Obviously, there are a lot of different parties with different interests, and different levels of authority. So keeping that balance can be challenging. And the other thing I would say is when you're in the thick of it and you've got a piece of work, whether it's, I don't know, a new landscape recovery scheme or a new countryside stewardship scheme or whatever it might be, or a piece of work that you want to do on a common, and it'll be absolutely front and centre of what you're thinking about. And it could be the main thing that you're working on at that time. But for a lot of people, it isn't. For the most people, it isn't. You know, being dragged along to a meeting when they've got 101 other things to be going on their farm or on the common or whatever it is, or whole other business to be their business to be running, getting to a meeting and getting time from people. You know, it's often pretty low down on their list. So it's important to think about that when you're planning how you're going to collaborate. So as Mark said here, strong collaboration is built on balance, whether that's power, voice, or something else. And it's vital that everyone has an equal part to play. So if people only have a small amount of time or they've got a whole load of other things going on, you need to bear that in mind and make sure that people do get the opportunity to feed in and be part of that balance. And then this is Mark's last slide, which is, I suppose the whole ethos is about doing things with people and not to them. So I'll let you have a little read of that. But it's about supporting people to have a sense of ownership of what they want to do on the common or on the piece of land that they're working on, which means you're going to have a much better likelihood of some good long-term outcomes. Taking time, building trust, helping people to have their own sense of ownership. And it might end up being something taking a direction that you perhaps weren't expecting. But if it's going to last in the long term and be a useful scheme, piece of work, project, whatever it is, the most important thing is that people own it. So there were Mark's top tips, and his dog agrees with those. So here are the 5 top tips from Mark for collaborative practice. I'll let you read those. I'm sorry you couldn't be here and you got me, but hopefully you'll find those useful and that'll give you some food for thought. I think I am now going to move along to Owen. Do you want to chip in anything, Lindsay, at this point?
No, thanks, Jo. That was really, really useful. And I'm hoping that this is something that those of you watching can come back to. I'll also be sharing these top tips in a simple printable so that you can refer back to them. So Owen, if you are ready.
Yes. Hello, everybody. Yes, so I'm Owen Morgan, and I tend to lead on all things kind of digital at FCL. So I'm going to talk about, that's fine. Click it on, Jo. So I'm going to talk kind of 5 points, top tips revolving particularly around kind of digital focus. So number 1 is using kind of digital collaborative platforms. Now at FCL we mainly use LandApp. There are obviously other platforms out there. The advantage to using any of those platforms, I think, is if you do collaborative working on any given project, obviously we're mainly on commons, it's such an effective way of condensing and bringing all that information to a joint hub where people can actually, create and edit those documents together. So rather than if you're setting off with a project and you end up with a situation where people have got different things on their laptops, and some people have got them on their phones, and some people have got them on pieces of paper, and all this sort of stuff, and collating them is really tricky. These digital platforms are fantastic for them because in real time, people are adding the information to it as they go along. So things don't get lost. They're kind of there, but they're also there in a collaborative way that everyone can see them. So they're very transparent in terms of information sharing. People can go on there. So if you've got 20 stakeholders and collaborators on a project, you can pop them all onto something like a LandApp project. They can all see what's going on. They can be updating it regularly, which is great in terms of actually allowing that collab. And obviously, in terms of data storage and things like that, it's a safe and secure way of storing that data as well. Things don't get lost. It's also very good in terms of coordinating across locations. So even on a project on a common, actually you might have different collaborators actually quite disparately spread out, but then also you might have collaborators like we, land agents, technical support like we offer, any other kind of outside supports that coming in. They can be disparate. They can be all over the country. Again, if you're using a digital platform, everyone can be keyed into that. Everyone can access it at a given time. If there's any problems, very easy for technical support to come in and help and resolve and tweak. So it's just a really good, effective way of bringing all the kind of information together. So that's one. Next slide, please, Joe. Might seem a really obvious thing, but this is something that we find really, really helpful, is using things like messaging apps. So we use WhatsApp a lot, and we encourage a lot of the groups that we work with to set up a WhatsApp group. Again, it's a very simple bit of technology. It's usually free to access. You can include everybody on it. Fantastic for quick updates. So if there's been a change, if something's happened, quick message on there, that everybody within your collaborative group gets that message straight away. There's no issue of someone getting left out or missing people out. Excellent for sharing images and documents. So again, when we're doing collaborative projects on a common, actually often it's a fantastic resource. If somebody's out on the common, they might not be even doing something that was revolved around that particular project, but they see something, take a quick photo of it, quick message, ping it out, everyone can see it and react to it. So it's a brilliant way of kind of sharing that real time sensitive information. Also great for kind of just maintaining that kind of informal dialogue. So if people are having a little problem, or they can't remember how to do something, or what was the date that we were going to do this or that or the other, it's fantastic. Pop it into your messaging thing. Somebody else within the community can help. Usually someone else in the group has that information, can share it. So really simple, really useful, but actually a lot of the most successful collaborative projects we have are ones which at the beginning kind of set up some kind of use a digital messaging tool, set up a group and use that for communication. I think we can move on now. Really, really important as well is in kind of effective training and having kind of equal digital literacy. Whenever you start a project and you're going to be using some kind of, whether it's a digital platform, whatever it is, you've got all participants need to be at a similar level, and they might not be coming into the process at the same level. We tend to find that actually people are very confident using all sorts of different technologies, to have other people who have never done it before. Key, I think, again, is get everyone together at the start. And even if it's just investing an hour or two at the beginning, getting everybody so that they're signed into everything okay, they know how to navigate the platforms, they know what the expectations in terms of use are. And also it tends to be the most effective way to troubleshoot as well, because usually people will generally have the same sort of problems, or the same sort of issues will come up. Often you can deal with those all in one go at the beginning, rather than sort of firefighting them as you go along and having to repeat similar things to people. So I think that's kind of key, is actually, if you're going to use something, have a training session or plan in some kind of training at the beginning of it. And the projects that we have that I think run the most smoothly using digital platforms are the ones that have done that. And then often actually the process itself is really quite smooth. While the projects where kind of there's an uneven understanding of the technology, often those are the ones which are a bit problematic. They need a lot more interventions along the way, and it slows the whole process. Next slide, please. I mean, this is kind of, I guess, an obvious thing, and this doesn't necessarily refer to digital, but all projects, clear communication is key. Project deadlines and timelines, expectations, so that everyone knows what they need to do, roles and responsibility, who's doing what in any given place, and as I say, changes, updates. And the thing is, I mean, that's kind of true of all projects really, but I think if you're doing things with digital tools, actually they've almost got an inbuilt solution to it. Say, if we're using things like WhatsApp, fantastic for things like this. Fantastic way to do things like this: project updates, expectations, checking that people are okay with things. If there's been a change, quick message, everyone is going to kind of receive that. It's a really good way to keep that kind of clear communication. Especially, if you're working digitally, you might be disparate, you might not be seeing one another all the time. It's just nice to, have a mechanism through which you can just keep that communication moving nice and clearly. And finally, which is something, as you say, you've heard it once before, and you're probably going to hear it again on this thing: appointing a dedicated facilitator. And on digital projects, that's as important as any other form of collaborative process. It absolutely strengthens the whole process, and it really links back to all the other points I've just talked about. The facilitator is the person who can deliver a lot of that, so they can oversee access to the tools. So if you're using digital platforms, you've got somebody who understands it at the center. They can provide that support and training. They can kind of encourage participation. They can manage the setup and manage things like a WhatsApp group, and be the person who kind of is on there doing the updates, monitoring progress. Again, something like when we use Landapp, fantastic for monitoring progress, but actually having one dedicated person whose kind of role is, whether weekly, monthly, whatever, go on there, check, see what's being done, and then they're in a position just to check on people. If somebody hasn't done it as expected, they can kind of check on them and get them the support that they need. Really important. Again, of the projects, we run some very complicated collaborative projects with 30, 40, 50 different participants on them, and they can run really smoothly with a really good dedicated facilitator. And then we have other projects which have 3 or 4 collaborators on it with no facilitator and kind of poor facilitation and communication, and they can become a real mess. So this is kind of really kind of central and key, to just kind of, if you're doing it, even if it's a small project, appoint somebody to play that kind of central hub role and just hold the whole thing together is really core. Yeah, and I think that's my 5 points, I think.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Owen. We're going to do a quick poll now, and we'd like you all to have a think about what your biggest challenges are on when you're working on common land. So if you could pop in your answers to these questions, and then if there's anything else, pop that in the chat for us. So really interesting to see. So the most popular challenge is managing strong individuals.
Excellent. Something to get stuck into in my, yeah, I'll be talking about that in a minute. So
yeah, no, that's really interesting. So very strong there. So managing strong individuals is a big issue. Encouraging people to be open to new ideas. And we are at a period of time where everyone needs to be thinking differently. And so the more that we can support you to help people with being open is really, really important. And then managing people with one agenda. So that's an issue that we know is a problem on Commons. So Joe is going to talk you through
I'm not sure that can solve everybody's strong individuals in 10 minutes, but we can have a chat anyway, can't we? And I can share a few tips. I'm going to focus in. Oh, it keeps doing this thing with the not wanting to move. There we are. I'm going to focus this in on workshops and meetings, because I think, and actually some of the principles of this you would use just generally. Now, this first slide, I don't want you to think that I get my family and sat around a big piece of flip chart and have to facilitate a discussion about what we're eating for Christmas dinner. But the first bit I'm going to talk about is being prepared for these big meetings, workshops, getting-togethers of whatever it is you're collaborating on, your project or your piece of work on your common. Because before you get people together, if you really want to make it as useful as possible and address some of those challenges that we were just talking about, there's a lot you can do in the preparation stage before you even kind of book the meeting room or whatever it is. So there's 2 or 3 things. Oh, I've got 5 tips on these different headings. But first one is think about who's coming. Think about whether you've got the right group of people all together. So going back to that point with just people saying about being open to new ideas, strong individuals, do you need to speak to people before the meeting or the workshop even happens? Find out who's coming, think about who those people are, have a think about whether you need to chat to them beforehand. You might want to do something in separate groups. You might want to have people who you think are going to be less confident to speak or who are a bit more reticent about coming along. You might want to meet them separately or have them in a separate group. And if you're not that familiar with the group, chat to somebody who is, find out about who's coming, and just kind of set the stall out in terms of who's going to be in the meeting or who's going to be at the workshop. Speak to them before if you need to. This is the absolute core of a lot of what I'm going to say. And this applies, I think, whether you're organising the meeting or you're an attendee of the meeting. You need to be really clear on what the goal and the outcomes of that meeting or workshop are, or that session that you're going to be having. So that everybody knows what it is, and this can really help stick to it. So I know one of the other challenges we put up is around people going off track or wanting to talk about something else. I would always say in a meeting or a workshop, have the goal up on the wall on a bit of paper. Don't have it hidden in a slide pack. Don't just say it and then expect people to remember it. Write it, stick it up somewhere, and then you can keep going back to it throughout the meeting or the workshop. So here's my example around a Christmas dinner workshop, but there's the goal and there's what I want people to have done by the end of the meeting. And again, you can go back to that. So that is your kind of bit of paper that helps guide you through and helps keep you on track as the meeting goes along. Okay, that also gives you clarity as a participant. So what I was just, if you're participating in a meeting and you've given up your time to something, it is okay to ask that question, I think, when you're sitting there thinking, what on earth have I come here for? Where is this going? I've taken an afternoon off work, or I've put aside a couple of hours this evening and I want to know what's going on. It's okay to ask, what's the goal of today? What do you want to get out of it? I mean, and I've done it an odd time when I felt confident enough to. But, you know, if you're giving up your time, it's okay to ask that question. Okay, the other thing when you're organising a meeting or a workshop, I would say, is be really clear where this fits in. So, is this a meeting that's followed on from something that's gone before? Are you expecting people to come along with some information and understanding about where you're up to? Do you need to let people know where this fits in? Do you need to remind them of what's happened before? Again, if people have got 101 other things to do, they might have been to a meeting a couple of months ago and probably can't remember what it was all about. You need to bring them up to speed. And also think about where this is going after. So where does this fit in? What's going to happen after this? And be clear on that as well and let people know. The other thing to say is to keep an open mind. So one of the things that Lindsay and I were talking about the other day, you know, if there's something going on, so Lindsay's in the New Forest, goes along to a workshop, there's some big issue that's kicked off on the Forest this week that everybody wants to talk about. They are not really that interested in talking about what you want them to talk about in that particular meeting or workshop. So it might be that you think, you know what, let's just have 15 minutes at the start of the meeting to get off our chests, whatever's bothering us, and what we're all thinking about. And then we'll go back to our goal that we've got up on the wall and our outcomes for the day, and we'll talk about those. But I think it's important to keep an open mind and think about where people are coming from on the day. The other thing to say is I always do this thing here, which is just popped up, and I'm calling it final checks. But, I mean, take a picture of this if you want. I always use an organiser's agenda, which sounds a bit dull, but it is basically your bit of paper with your agenda of what you want to get through and all the other bits of information that you need for that day, for that session. So the goal, the outcomes, what you need to do beforehand, what you need to send out, what resources you need, what's going to happen on the day, right down to your room layout, what time people are arriving, and who's doing which bit in which session, I would put that on one bit of paper and have a lot of detail and think about that beforehand. So that's my prep top tips. On the day then, delivery, setting the scene, things like your room layout are really important. And going back to the challenges at the beginning that we put up, even just where people are sitting and how they're positioned in the room can make a big difference. So for me, having an audience in like an auditorium setup where you're stuck up at the front, everybody's in rows, and you're doing a presentation, and then people are in the audience just asking questions or talking to you. That is my least favourite way of setting up a room. I would try my best to have something where people are sat around tables, in groups, more informal. I think people call this cafe style, but you know what? That kind of layout where you're encouraging people to talk to each other, and not have you up the front and a load of people sat in the audience. So that's a good thing to think about. I'd also think about taking time at the start for introductions, checking people in, making sure people know who's who, and we're not a massive fan of it, but if it's a big group and there's a lot of people who don't know each other, use the name label, just get some sticky labels and just get people to sort of pop the name on, and then they know who's who. The other thing I'd say is, it is okay at the start of a meeting, and you don't want to sound like too dictatorial, but it's okay to set out a few ground rules. So for example, do you want people to have their phones off, or could you say, if you need to attend something and you need to be on your phone, could you do it outside the room? Or can we all commit to making sure that everybody gets a chance to speak tonight or this afternoon? So it's worth setting out a few things like that around how you want the meeting to run. Share the agenda, run through that at the beginning, share those outcomes and that goal, and keep going back to it throughout the meeting. And the other thing to think about, which I sort of tend to do more and more these days, is if you're the person who's going to be responsible for writing this meeting, or taking forward the actions that are there, try your best to record things as you go along, whether it is bits of video, whether it's having a slide deck like this that you type stuff up in as you go along. You don't really want to end up, I don't think, with 20 massive flip charts with loads of notes on that you've got to go away, type up after the meeting. And also, if you're able to do it on a PowerPoint presentation as you're going along, people can see what you're writing up as well. So there's my top 5 tips for delivery. Last job, challenges then, we'll go back to those, and we can maybe have a chat about this after, or we can ask if anybody's got questions around this or good examples of where they've made things work for them. My number 5 popped up, but I think this is an important one. If you're the facilitator for a meeting, or you're there to run the meeting, you're in charge, and you can make things work in the best way that you can to achieve that goal or those outcomes for the meetings. So don't be afraid. And often I find if I'm running a meeting, people usually like to be told what to do-ish. They're okay to be guided, and they like to know what's happening and what the purpose is and all the rest of it, and what to expect in the meeting. So be confident on that. So managing strong individuals, ensuring everybody gets a chance to participate, encouraging people to be open to new ideas, and keeping on time and getting people back on track if you've gone off track. There's some of the challenges that we sort of identified at the beginning of this in that poll. So I'm going to give you a few tips on that. So this first one then, managing strong individuals, right back to things like the room layout. I would say you want to set your stall out in a way that disseminates one person's influence on the meeting. So having people in smaller groups to work together is a great way of doing that. You might, if you know who's coming, want to allocate people to different groups beforehand and just give a list of who you want in which group, so you can mix people up a bit. I would also say you want a mix of methods for getting people's feedback and input. So you might be asking people to write things down, 1 or 2 things down on a post-it. You might be asking people to just take some quiet time and reflect on something and write it down. You might ask people to speak in a pair, or talk to their neighbour about something. So you kind of taking away that opportunity for one person to take the lead or to have a big influence on the meeting, and splitting people into groups and having them round tables, even better over a cup of tea and a piece of cake, is one way of doing that. And the other thing, like I said right at the start, think about who is at which meeting and whether you might want to have some conversations beforehand or split people up a bit and have a couple of separate meetings if it's a big project that you're getting going. Ensuring all people get the chance to participate is another one. So that often, if somebody's a bit quieter, you want to make sure that they've had a chance to contribute. So a bit similar, really, offering opportunities for people to work individually, to work in pairs. You might ask a question like, could you write down your top 2 solutions to this particular problem, and then pass it on and let people add to that list, so everybody gets an opportunity. If they're not that confident to speak, that gives them an option. The other thing you can do, if you've got a bunch of you working on a project, or you've got other people that you know will help, if you're sitting at a few tables working on stuff together, have one person on each table that you brief beforehand and ask them to make sure that everybody chips in and gets a chance to speak, so you don't have to do everything on your own. Encouraging people to be open to new ideas. I think this is a big one. What I said at the beginning, if people are set on something and they want to get it off their chest, if there's a big issue in the area where you're working, having some time to offload first is a good idea, so people can kind of say what they want to say and then put it to one side. Having that goal on display and the outcomes for the meeting up on the wall and going back to it and reminding people of why they're there is another one. The other thing I would say is, I mean, if you're anything like me, when I'm thinking about things that I remember or things that I want to take on board or try, are usually because I've had a first-hand experience of it. I've either seen something on the ground, through a site visit, or I've had a conversation with somebody who's been working on something that I trust and believe in, and they've opened my eyes to a new idea. So you going along and saying, oh, such and such says this looks great, and such has told us that we should be doing this, is not always that convincing. But if you're able to do something where you're going to look at something on the ground and see some change that's happened, or hear from somebody firsthand about a new idea, I think that's a good way of tackling that. And the other one thing I would say is set your expectations, so it can take a long time to think about adopting a new way of working on something or thinking about a different way of doing something. You're not going to do it at one meeting in one night. It can take years, months, even years for people to be open to changing things, especially when it relates to land management, which, takes a long time to make things happen. So there's a few on encouraging people to be open to new ideas. Keeping on time, getting back on track. Oh God, I've just realised it's 2 minutes to 2. Thinking about keeping on time. Stick to what you've said on the time, I would always say. Don't go over time. If things are starting to go off piece a little bit, take a break and then come back to them. You can take a break at any point in a meeting. Break things down into small chunks and give people specific tasks so you don't have huge opportunities for major rambles. So that's my top 5 tips on some of those challenges. I'll just pass it back to Lindsay, realising that we're running out of time.
Oh, I think it's been really, really useful. Thank you, Jo. We've got some questions and we'll run through those in a moment. One thing came to mind when Jo was talking. Very often people will organise a meeting and they will arrange chairs in sort of a theatre way. So a speaker at the front and lines of chairs. That type of arrangement is really good for disseminating information if you've got a lot of information to give to a group of people. But from a collaboration and getting information from that group of people, that's not going to work. So as Jo was talking about circles and groups of people and small groups, that's much more effective. So I don't want to keep you longer than you need to be. So I'm just going to quickly go through some of the extra guidance and resources we have available for you. So the Common Land and Shared Grazing Supplement for Countryside Stewardship. Some of you have asked specific questions about that in the chat. That's the go-to for information for Countryside Stewardship. Our website for the toolkit, we have a library of case studies and examples available on our website. If we move the slide on. I went to the Victoria and Albert Museum, and there's an incredible piece of art by Grayson Perry. It's two very large pots, and he asked people who were for and against Brexit to share what they thought about Britain. And then he created these two beautiful pots. And when you stand there and look at them, they are the same. Whether you are for or against, most people, their views of this country are very, very similar. So I want you to think about the things that people think about Commons. There is so much more that binds people together than separates them. And your job as a facilitator is to find that common ground, to find the things that will link people, the things that will join people together. And when you really get down to it, people love Commons. People love those places. And they really want the best for them. So that would be my big top tip from myself. There's a huge bank of resources. When you get these slides through, you'll be able to click through these links and explore them further. So I don't need to talk about them. You can just go back to them at a later date. Joe, if we could move on. This is really important. If you're in the north of England and can get to the Lake District for face-to-face sessions, this collaborative practice in land management course will be amazing. We've got some bursary places available. We're also looking at delivering this course in Dartmoor and in the New Forest at a later date. So if you have got a group of people who would be interested in a collaborative practices course, it's got a combination of online units and face-to-face sessions. This would be really, really good. So we've got a poll just popping up, and this is a question really of how we can help you further in the future. So would you like some in-person Hill Farm or Lowland Farm training? Would you like to join one of our online masterclasses? It's a 4-hour morning session that really does a deep dive into Commons. Would you be interested in the short courses? And would you like more webinars? The next point on that is, what would you like us to be delivering in our webinars going forward? We can gather the resources, we can gather the experts, and we can help you to deliver on Commons. We'll end that one there. And again, quite a few of you would like some extra online resources. Go and have a look and see what's on FCL already. It's quite vast. I think you'll be surprised at what's there. Next slide. Okay, so, and here at the very end, you've got all of our email addresses. So if you'd like to contact us directly, we would be delighted to have a conversation with you. So we've just got a couple of questions. So for those of you that have got time to hang on, we'll just stay for another few minutes just to answer some of your questions. A really good question was, who is managing people if it's a collaborative process? So Joe, I wonder if you could answer that one.
I can give it a go. I mean, that's an interesting one, isn't it? Is there a manager, or is it that as a facilitator, I would say,
yes,
it's about bringing people together, but you're not necessarily managing people. But as Owen said in one of his bits, you need somebody who is there as the point of contact, the facilitator, the person who sort of triggers that collaboration, don't you? But they don't necessarily, managing people might not really be the right term, I don't think. I think it's more about a facilitation role.
I think it's about managing the process.
Yeah.
When you manage the process, that's when you deliver collaboration rather than, and the managing of people is managing the more challenging people. So making sure that everyone has a voice and gets their chance. Another question that I thought was interesting was, how do you deal with a difficult landlord? So if Julia were here, she would probably say that using a really good, experienced land agent in that circumstance is probably the best thing to do. Sometimes conversations, as Jo said, need to happen separately so that you really get to the nub of the problem. And I would imagine there are landowners who would say, how do you deal with a difficult commoner? So that's a perpetual problem going forward. So I think it's trust, really being open, transparent, recognizing the balance of power is really, really important. And it's something we deep dive into much more into the collaborative practice course and on our in our masterclasses. So it might be worth thinking about those if that's an option. I think just double check the Q&A.
I think there's a couple of questions in there about funding for facilitation or funding for facilitators. Yeah. So
from an FCL perspective, whenever we're planning a project, we do plan facilitation into the budget. And it's often overlooked. You need to think about full cost recovery. So you need to think about making sure that you are including that. It's part of the delivery. I know that is an issue, particularly I know someone on here was talking about some farm clusters, and I know that they've been funded previously through facilitation funds, and it is an absolute tragedy facing farm clusters that funds is no longer available. And so from an FCL perspective, when we talk to policymakers, we are constantly reiterating the importance of facilitation. So that's how we can help at sort of a national level. And I would say if you're putting funding bids in, include facilitation in the funding bid. Jo, Tamsin, did you want to add anything to that?
No, other than I do have one more tip really in the fact that if you're wanting to make get a decision made, or even if you're wanting to influence people, change their mindset. Say I was looking at a Springmire, for example. We want to do some changes to the Springmire to make it better, to improve its condition. And I got a peat restoration specialist there, but I didn't get the all-important landowner there at that time. So we had all these wonderful discussions, and people were trying to change their behaviour and changing their minds about what they, how we saw the work there going forward. But because I hadn't got the landowner there, we had to redo the whole meeting again because he wasn't privy to those conversations. So it's just, don't try and rush things because you've only got a small amount of time. Really do wait until everybody can be at those meetings, because it really does save you time in the long run.
And no, I was looking at my notes. One of my notes I'd put down was that commons are fragile and relationships matter, because everything is connected. And I think Tamsin's example there is absolutely key to that. And we have to tread lightly when we work on common land, because we're impacting on all sorts of different people in different ways. Sometimes people will never meet, particularly members of the public who've got strong connections to a bridge where they dropped poo sticks when they were children. Everything is connected, and we have to be mindful of that. I don't want to take your time anymore. Thank you so much for joining us today. We won't be seeing you again until after Christmas, so wishing you all a lovely, happy Christmas and a lovely New Year. And finally, our next webinars will be a series of webinars on vegetation management. So we're starting in January with bracken and gorse, moving then on to using data and digital tools for vegetation and animal management, and then on to Millennia in March. So if you've got any questions about those subjects, let us know and we'll see if we can build them into the webinar. There's a quick poll on here for how useful you found this webinar. It's a different style to our usual style of webinar, and we're really keen to know whether you prefer this sort of practical working tips type webinar. So yeah, let us know. And likewise, if you've got any other ideas of things you'd like to learn, please yeah, let us know. Thank you so much for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.